Torah Shabbat Week 11. Numbers 8:1 through 12:16. Numbers chapter 8. Lighting of the lamps. In Numbers 8:1 through 3, God instructs Moses to arrange the lamps on the golden lampstand in the tabernacle. The lampstand itself could not produce light. It needed lamps to be placed upon it. These lamps burned specially made olive oil and symbolized the church as a platform for the light of Jesus to shine. The light from the lampstand illuminated the table of showbread and the altar of incense nearby, emphasizing God's attention to his people. The lampstand was made of hammered gold, solid and massive. It had one central shaft with 3 branches on each side, totaling 7 places for lamps. Unlike other tabernacle items covered in gold, the lampstand was entirely made of solid gold. Aaron's lighting of the lamps represented his divine master, or God. Similarly, the scriptures serve as a light shining in a dark place, illuminating the church and preventing it from being spiritually dark, like the tabernacle without windows. Numbers chapter 9. Keeping the Passover. In Numbers 9:1 through 5, God instructs Moses regarding the observance of the Passover. Israel had celebrated the first Passover as they left Egypt. Now, 1 year later, God commands them to keep the Passover a second time. The tabernacle was completed on the first day of the first month of the second year, and the cloud of glory covered it. It was a time of preparation and celebration, anticipating their triumphant march into the land of Canaan. Passover reminded Israel of God's deliverance from slavery in Egypt. The blood of the lamb applied to their doorpost caused the angel of judgment to pass over their homes. Jesus later fulfilled this symbolism through his sacrificial death on the cross. As Christians, we continually remember our deliverance and Jesus' work on the cross through the Lord's Supper. Numbers 9:15 through 23 describe the function of the cloud by day and the fiery pillar by night. These symbols represented God's presence and guidance during Israel's journeys. The cloud covered the tabernacle, signifying God's leading. When the cloud lifted, Israel would break camp and follow it. At night, the fiery pillar provided light and warmth. These manifestations assured Israel that God was with them, directing their path and protecting them throughout their wilderness wanderings. Numbers chapter 10. 2 silver trumpets. In Numbers 10:1 and 2, God instructs Moses to make 2 silver trumpets. These trumpets serve several purposes. They are used to call the congregation and direct the movement of the camps during their journey to the Promised Land. These silver trumpets are distinct from the ram's horn shofars used for specific occasions like the Day of Atonement or the fall of Jericho. The silver trumpets were straight pipes about 18 inches long, with narrow tubes. When blown in specific patterns, they emitted bright and piercing sound, communicating clearly to the people. The trumpets were essential tools for assembling the nation and marching toward Canaan. They emphasize the need to give God our attention before obeying him. Numbers 10:3 through 10. God outlines the system for blowing the trumpets. When both trumpets sound, the entire congregation gathers at the tabernacle door. If only one trumpet sounds, the leaders and heads of divisions gather. The trumpets signal the advance of specific camps, east side first, then south side. The trumpets are used during war to sound an alarm, and in times of gladness, over offerings and sacrifices. The sons of Aaron, the priest, are responsible for blowing the trumpets, and this ordinance continues throughout generations. Numbers chapter 11. In Numbers 11:1-3, we encounter the complaints of the Israelites after being blessed, taught, and given God's presence. They still murmured against him. Their complaining displeased the Lord, and his anger was aroused. As a consequence, the fire of the Lord burned among them, consuming some of the outskirts of the camp. Moses interceded, and the fire was quenched. In Numbers 11:4-9, the mixed multitude lusted after flesh, reminiscing about the foods in Egypt. God responded by describing the manna, the miraculous bread he provided daily. Despite its divine origin, the people craved variety and complained. The manna was a symbol of God's provision, but their discontent revealed ingratitude and folly. God's grace was abundant, yet their hearts longed for what they lacked. In Numbers 11:10-15, we find Moses' uneasiness and complaint about the heavy burden of leading the people. He felt overwhelmed. God promised to share Moses' spirit with 70 elders, allowing them to assist in bearing the leadership load. Additionally, God assured the people that they would have meat for a whole month. Numbers chapter 12. In Numbers 12:1, Miriam and Aaron criticized Moses because of his Egyptian wife. They disapproved of Moses marrying an Egyptian woman. The real issue, however, goes beyond Moses' wife. Their criticism reflects a deeper challenge to Moses' spiritual authority. They question whether God speaks only through Moses or also through them. Their challenge is not merely a question. It's an attack on Moses' authority and the God who appointed him. God hears their criticism. He doesn't tolerate their rebellion against Moses, his chosen leader. The chapter reveals Moses' patience and humility. Despite the attacks from his own family, he remains steadfast in his role as God's spokesman. Ultimately, God vindicates Moses and reaffirms his unique position as the primary channel for divine communication to Israel. Criticizing others based on superficial factors like appearance distracts from real issues. Challenges to spiritual authority often stem from pride and jealousy. Moses' example teaches us to remain humble and trust God's calling, even when facing opposition from unexpected sources. Zechariah 2:10-4:7. In Zechariah 2:10-13, the prophet receives a vision of a man with a measuring line. This angelic being intends to measure Jerusalem, symbolizing its future expansion. The city will be inhabited like towns without walls, overflowing with people and livestock. God promises to be a protective wall of fire around Jerusalem and the glory within it. Ultimately, this prophecy points to the Messiah's reign and the safety of God's people. The call to return from exile echoes, urging the exiles to leave Babylon and return to Zion. God's people are encouraged to escape the influence of Babylon, both physically and spiritually. In Zechariah 4:6, the Lord speaks to Zerubbabel, the governor of Judah, emphasizing that the rebuilding of the temple will not happen by human strength or power. Instead, it will be accomplished by the Spirit of the Lord. The great mountain, the obstacles before Zerubbabel, will become a plain, and he will complete the temple. The eyes of the Lord watch over this work. The message extends beyond the temple's physical reconstruction. It points to the work of redemption, the coming of Christ, and the establishment of his kingdom. The day of small beginnings will lead to rejoicing as God's Spirit empowers his people. These prophecies find fulfillment in both historical events, such as the rebuilding of Jerusalem under Ezra and Nehemiah, and the ultimate reign of the Messiah. They remind us of God's faithfulness and his sovereign plan for his people. 1 Corinthians 10:6-13. In these verses, Paul draws lessons from Israel's history to warn the Corinthian Christians about their behavior. Israel, despite receiving blessings like passing through the Red Sea, experiencing God's presence in the cloud, and partaking of spiritual food, still faced temptations and fell into sin. These experiences serve as patterns for the Corinthians. They too have received spiritual blessings, but must be cautious. Paul warns against idolatry, referring to Israel's past failures. Idolatry can lead to spiritual downfall. The Corinthians must avoid indulging in sexual immorality, as some of the Israelites did. Their disobedience led to severe consequences. Paul cautions against putting Christ to the test, as the Israelites did in the wilderness. Testing God's patience can have dire consequences. The Corinthians should not grumble, just as Israel did. Complaining displeased God and led to their scattering in the wilderness. These historical examples were recorded for our instruction. We must heed them, especially as at the end of the age approaches. Paul emphasizes that even those who think they are standing should take heed. Overconfidence can lead to stumbling. Temptations are common to humanity, but God provides a way of escape. In summary, Paul urges the Corinthians to learn from Israel's mistakes, remain vigilant, and rely on God's grace to overcome temptation.